Hello and welcome to In Depth. I'm Tina Jha. On 3rd and 4th December, NATO leaders met in London to mark the 70th anniversary of the military alliance. The summit, that was expected to cover issues like cyber attacks and strategic challenges posed by China, was overshadowed by differences among the member countries themselves. These included Turkey's recent military action in northern Syria, the varying levels of military spending by members, as well as the future of the 29-member bloc. More significantly, the summit saw a highly publicized sparring between US President Donald Trump and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron on issues ranging from terrorism to trade. So what was meant to be a show of unity on the 70th year of the world's most powerful defense alliance turned out to be a display of disagreement on the world stage. On the show today, we talk about the issues that were raised by the presidents of America and France, the background of the tensions among the member countries of NATO, the future of the alliance, the challenge of staying relevant in the modern times, and of course, the history of the world's most powerful defense alliance. NATO started out in 1949 with just 12 countries as members. But having expanded to a bloc of 29 countries now, it is becoming increasingly difficult for the alliance to project a united front. The two key issues that loomed over the summit this year were defense spending and relations between Turkey and other member countries. The issue of Turkey launching a unilateral attack on Syria was among several issues that even led to exchanges between the presidents of the United States and France.
Hours before the 70th anniversary summit of the NATO alliance, presidents of France and the US clashed with each other over Syria, Turkey, import tariffs, and the future of the Western alliance. Launching a pre-summit broadside, US President Donald Trump called the comments of French counterpart Emmanuel Macron nasty and very insulting. This was in response to Macron stating last month that NATO was suffering brain death. In retaliation, Trump said NATO serves a great purpose and France is one of the biggest beneficiaries of the alliance.
It's a tough statement, though, when you make a statement like that. That is a very, very nasty statement to essentially 28, including them, 28 countries. I think that, you have a very high unemployment rate in France. France is not doing well economically at all. They're starting to tax other people's products, so therefore we go and tax them. It's just taking place right now on technology, and we're doing their wines and everything else. And it's a very tough statement to make when you have such difficulty in France. You look at what's happened with the yellow vests, or you look at what's going on during certain parts of their season. They've had a very rough year. And you just can't go around making statements like that about NATO. It's very disrespectful. Nobody needs NATO more than France. And frankly, the one that benefits really the least is the United States. We benefit the least. We're helping Europe. Europe unites and they go against a common foe. That may or may not be a foe. Can't tell you that. But there are other foes out there also. But I think nobody needs it more than France. And that's why I think that when France makes a statement like they made about NATO, it's a very dangerous statement for them to make.
The French president, on the other hand, stood by his comments about the health of NATO. He firmly expressed his frustration that the US president withdrew hundreds of American troops from Syria in October without consulting NATO allies, and which gave Turkey a green light to launch operations against Syrian Kurdish forces, who played a key role in clearing up a huge swath of Syria of the Islamic State.
And I'm sorry to say that we don't have the same definition of terrorism around the table. When I look at Turkey, they now are fighting against those who fight with us, who fought with us, shoulder to shoulder against ISIS. And sometimes they work with ISIS proxies. This is an issue, and this is a strategic issue. if we just have discussion about what we pay, and we don't have clear discussions about such a situation, we are not serious. We are not serious for our soldiers, we are not serious for our people.
See, brain dead means that there is not much thinking behind NATO. Now, in one or two instances, in, say, Syria, NATO members were backing one particular group of Kurds, etc., which was fighting Islamic State, ISIL. And suddenly, President Trump removed the American troops and made it difficult for Kurds to function. And he did not have any consultation with NATO members. So at some, Macron feels that there is not enough thinking, common thinking, among the 29 members of NATO, and that's why it's calling NATO brain dead.
However, hours after the broadside, Macron and Trump sat side by side for a one-on-one meeting. The US president struck a warmer tone, stressing that the two countries had done a lot of good things together as partners.
We'll be talking about a lot of things, including NATO and including trade. We do a lot of trade with France. We have a minor dispute. I think we'll probably be able to work it out. But we have a big trade relationship, and I'm sure that within a short period of time, things will be looking very rosy, we hope.
But Trump's diplomatic tone came just hours after he announced new tariffs on French champagne, wine, cheese and other products totaling $2.4 billion, saying the digital service tax France is imposing on US tech giants like Facebook, Google and Twitter is unacceptable. Although NATO leaders sought to make a show of unity as they met to conclude their annual summit on Wednesday, the celebration of NATO's 70th birthday was completely overshadowed by bitter rows over Turkey, Syria, money and the future strategy of the alliance. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
In many ways, the differences among the NATO members is a manifestation of the existential crisis for the institution. Given how far NATO has come from the original purpose for which it was originally established, these differences have now become acute in the current times.
What we are currently experiencing is the brain death of NATO, a statement that French President Emmanuel Macron made in an interview has created a flutter among NATO countries. It is raising questions about NATO's relevance, renewing relationships with allies, and the extension of its agenda. Member nations are hard-pressed to answer questions about the organization's future and its place on the global landscape. However, deciding reforms for the military alliance are not easy, mainly because NATO was not set up for the world in which we live in today. NATO was created in the wake of World War II. It was aimed at protecting members against threats posed by the then Soviet Union. Today's world has many challenges, but military threats are only one part of them. Trade, political tensions, disruptive technologies, financial flows are more prone to pit NATO allies themselves on opposite sides of the fence.
See, NATO was established in 1949 with a very clear enemy, which was Soviet Union. It was an ideological enemy, and also in Europe there was an existential threat that Soviet Union will expand and gobble up West Europe. Now, after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990-91, there is no clear enemy for NATO members. So two things have happened. They have tried to retain the present-day Russia as an enemy. For some countries it is an enemy, for some others it is not. The other issue is that there are new challenges, like terrorism has come. And of course, after 9/11, the NATO members joined United States, and that ISAF was there, and they participated in this war against terrorism. But that has also now become a weak bond.
For instance, China is posing new challenges to the United States. The disagreements have involved the tech sector, with the US taking steps to stop Chinese firm Huawei from selling its technology in America. The issue has sparked division within the NATO allies, mainly Germany and France taking a different stance to the US administration. Similarly, Turkey recently bought Russian-made defense equipment. This has NATO members jittery, given that NATO's traditional foe is Russia. While US President Trump complains that European leaders are not contributing 2% of their GDP to NATO as agreed, European leaders are wary about his America First policy. Trump's decision to unilaterally withdraw troops from northeast Syria without consulting NATO allies in October has only deepened the trust deficit. While NATO nations question the commitment of its most powerful member, the US, to the alliance, Trump himself is heavily critical about their contribution, given that Germany spent only 1.36% of its GDP on defense needs in 2019, despite a huge budgetary surplus.
29 members, they have different adversaries. Now Turkey thinks that they have their own vision of Russia as well as of what is terrorism. Some countries like Poland, Hungary, Baltic republics, which were part of Soviet Union and are now members of NATO, for them Russia is the main threat. For America, now, at least under President Trump, they feel that NATO members should take care of their own security. They are not doing enough for defense. Another issue which successive US presidents have raised is about the budget. Because the fact remains that United States spends almost 4% of its budget GDP on defense, whereas for the NATO countries it is about 1.34%, the European countries, and their objective is to take it to 2%. On that there are a lot of differences. So basic issue is that there is no common understanding that which is the real threat, real enemy for NATO members.
Another huge problem is that NATO does not see any military threat against any NATO ally, but only a more assertive Russia using military force against neighbors in Ukraine and Georgia, and China acquiring more advanced nuclear weapons. Experts agree that it is the political deficiencies and not military deficiencies that are the biggest challenge for the alliance, all of which has made NATO's 70th birthday a period of great self-doubt. With inputs from Anu Diwan, Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And time for a very short break on the program here, but on the other side, we'll talk about the challenges before NATO. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching In Depth. NATO is currently facing some of its biggest challenges, from the fall of the INF Treaty, triggering the Russian threat, to China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. Here's a look at the challenges NATO needs to overcome in order to stay relevant.
At the age of 17, NATO is facing some of its most daunting challenges yet, handling the US-Russia conflict over the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty being the topmost. In October 2018, US President Donald Trump announced his intention to withdraw the US from the INF Treaty in response to years of repeated alleged treaty violations by Russia. On February 2nd this year, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo formally declared that the United States will withdraw from the treaty in August. However, there are fears of escalation of the Russia-US tensions after August 2nd in the wake of Russia publicly displaying its nuclear-capable SSC-8 ground-based cruise missile. Other than Russia, NATO is also looking closely at China's expanding military presence in the Indo-Pacific. China is also becoming assertive in Africa and the Middle East. US President Donald Trump's decision to review the extent of its commitments in Afghanistan is also a cause of concern among NATO allies and partners. Earlier this year, Trump said progress in negotiations with the Taliban would allow a reduction in the approximately 14,000 US troops currently in Afghanistan. This has raised concerns about whether a smaller force can support the Afghan military and whether other European armies that rely on American equipment would pull out. NATO's conventional form of military intervention is also posing a challenge. With threats of chemical-grade weapons, cyber attacks, disinformation and even space wars, NATO needs to upgrade itself. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And let's now give you a brief history of NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is a military alliance that was originally established in 1949 with 12 member states, including America, Britain and France. Today, NATO has 29 members, including most of Europe, representing a population of more than 900 million. Its headquarters are in Brussels in Belgium. So here's a detailed history on the formation of NATO.
On 4th April 1949, 12 countries signed the North Atlantic Treaty. Their union was known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organization or NATO. The 12 NATO signatories were Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Italy, Portugal, the United Kingdom, Iceland, Canada and the United States. NATO was formed to counter the threat of post-war communist expansion as the Soviet Union sought to extend its influence in Europe. NATO was the first peacetime military alliance that the United States entered into outside the Western Hemisphere. NATO's aims have been to safeguard the freedom, common heritage and civilization of its members by promoting stability and well-being in the North Atlantic area. In addition to the original 12 countries, the organization included Greece and Turkey in 1952 and West Germany in 1955. Militarily, the alliance has always been dominated by the United States. In retaliation to NATO in 1955, the Soviet Union created a counter-alliance. Called the Warsaw Project, its rivalry with NATO set the tone for the Cold War era. Then Warsaw Pact was dissolved after the breakup of the USSR in 1991. A few years later, the Czech Republic, Hungary and Poland that were former Warsaw Pact countries entered NATO in 1999. In 2004, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania that were all republics of erstwhile USSR, along with Slovenia, Slovakia, Bulgaria and Romania were welcomed as NATO members. Bosnia, Montenegro and Serbia also joined NATO's Partnership for Peace program, a first step towards membership. In 2008, Albania and Croatia were also invited to join NATO. The stated purpose of NATO as given in Article 5 of the agreement is that if any of its ally is a victim of an armed attack, each and every other member of the alliance will consider it as an act of violence. NATO countries will see it as an armed attack against all members and take action to assist the attacked ally. The agreement thus binds America to defend Europe whenever it is under attack. This pledge is made still more formidable by the fact that America possesses the second biggest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. On 12 September 2001, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks and for the first time in NATO's history, allies invoked the principle of Article 5. Each NATO country has to pay a certain amount into the NATO budget based on an agreed formula. NATO requires member states to spend 2% of their nation's wealth on defense. Apart from funding, all members also pitch in with forces and equipment. They remain under the command of the member country unless they are required by NATO to deal with a crisis or conflict. The current Secretary General is Jens Stoltenberg, a former Prime Minister of Norway. He has been in office since October 2014. The Secretary General is nominated by member governments for 4 years, but this can be extended by mutual consent. His job is to chair all major committees, steer discussions, and help make sure decisions are implemented. His biggest role is chairing the North Atlantic Council. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And that's it from us today in depth. We'll be back same time tomorrow with a focus on some other subject. In case you missed the television broadcast of our program, you can also watch it online on YouTube and Twitter. And you can also send in your feedback and suggestions about our program. Thank you for your time.